The wind howled through the narrow alley of rusted fences, carrying with it the bitter chill of early winter and the scent of cold metal, old hay, and fear. Crows perched on power lines like black omens, watching with lifeless eyes as trucks pulled into the muddy gravel lot of Thompson's livestock auction. Dusty boots splashed through puddles, voices barked over one another, and the familiar clanging of gates echoed through the heavy morning fog. The auction was in full swing, but not a soul could ignore the growing silence as the next lot was led out. She was barely more than a shadow of a horse, her coat caked in mud and matted like a neglected rug. Ribs jutted from her flanks like the ridges of a broken fence, and her spine curved downward as if crushed by the weight of invisible burdens. One eye was swollen shut, the other glazed and vacant. She stumbled as the handler tugged her forward, a frayed rope digging into her thin neck. The auctioneer adjusted his microphone and cleared his throat. Lot 93. Mare, approximately 10 years old. Unknown lineage. Opening bid starts at, let's say $50. No hands raised. The silence spread through the crowd like a chill down the spine. A woman in a red coat muttered, "That thing shouldn't even be standing." A man nearby snorted, "I've seen better bones in a glue factory." The auctioneer frowned. "All right. 30. Still nothing." He looked over at the handlers with a shrug. The mare stood trembling, her legs barely holding her upright. She seemed aware of the stares, the judgment. She lowered her head as if trying to disappear. 20? 10? Come on, folks. Someone at least make me feel like I'm doing my job here. A kill buyer in a stained cowboy hat leaned against the fence and tapped his fingers on the rail. He didn't need to bid. He knew how this went. If no one took her, she was his by default. A quick turnaround. Easy money. The auctioneer gave a final glance over the crowd. $1. For a long, unbearable moment, it seemed even that insult wouldn't be paid. Then, a hand went up at the very back of the crowd. A thin, calloused hand, covered in a torn glove with the fingertips worn out. The auctioneer squinted. "We got a bid for $1. Everyone turned. A boy stepped forward from the shadows of the barn. Maybe 16, 17 at most. His jacket was 2 sizes too big, patched at the elbows and covered in trail dust. A baseball cap tugged low over his eyes shadowed his expression, but the way he held himself, awkward but firm, caught people off guard. The crowd shifted. Someone laughed. "You buying a horse or a problem, boy?" someone shouted. He said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the mare. The auctioneer blinked, then smirked. "Sold to the young man with exactly $1 more sense than the rest of you." Laughter spread through the crowd. The boy walked up to the pen, handed over the $1, and took the rope with a quiet, steady grip. "What the hell you gonna do with that?" the kill buyer muttered as he walked past, shaking his head. "She's nothin' but trouble." The boy didn't answer. He simply walked away, leading the trembling horse behind him, step by fragile step. No trailer. No saddle. Not even a proper halter. Just the frayed rope and an unspoken promise. He called her Ash. Not because of her color, which was a dull, mottled brown hidden beneath mud and filth, but because she reminded him of something burned down, something once bright that now barely flickered with the memory of flame. The walk home took nearly 4 hours. Every few feet Ash would stop, heaving, as if her legs were made of sand. Cars passed on the highway nearby, honking or slowing to gape. One driver rolled down the window and yelled something about animal cruelty. Luke, because that was the boy's name, didn't answer. He kept his eyes forward, whispering now and then to the horse like they shared some secret the world had forgotten. By the time he reached the old farm, dusk had fallen. A single porch light glowed like a beacon in the growing darkness. The place wasn't much. A sagging house, a leaning barn, and fences held together with more hope than nails. But it was home. His grandfather met him on the porch, wrapped in an old army coat. He was tall, even in the stoop of age, with hands like gnarled oak and eyes sharp enough to see straight through any excuse. He didn't say anything as he watched Luke lead the horse into the barn. Just nodded once and turned back inside. Luke worked through the night. He set up the old stall with the broken gate, pulled a thin blanket from his own bed to cover Ash's shivering body, and offered her a bucket of warm water mixed with honey and oat. She didn't touch it at first. Her eyes stared past him, deep into some place of pain no human could understand. But he sat there, knees pulled to his chest, and waited. "Everyone laughed at you today," he said softly. "Said you were worth less than a sandwich." Ash blinked slowly. "I don't care. I think you've got something in you. Just like me." He didn't know why he said it out loud. Maybe he needed someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't give him advice or pity, or that tired look of someone who didn't believe in much anymore. Because he remembered, not so long ago, another voice telling him the same thing, his mother's voice, from when she was alive. Telling him he was enough, even when the world said otherwise. Ash shifted in the straw. Luke lay down beside her, the barn cold and the wind slipping through cracks in the walls. He tucked his arms into his jacket and stared up at the wooden beams above, whispering stories into the silence. About his mom, about the horse books they used to read, about the way she believed in saving things no one else wanted. He didn't notice the moment when Ash finally lowered her head and nuzzled the bucket. Morning came slow and gray. Luke's grandfather stood at the barn door, watching the boy and the horse curled up in the straw. He didn't interrupt, just leaned against the frame with arms crossed and something softer in his eyes than usual. Later that day, Luke found an old brush in the tack room and began combing through Ash's filthy mane. Every tug revealed another hidden scar. Each mark told a story Luke didn't want to imagine. Yet Ash didn't flinch. She stood still, breathing slow, as if trying to remember what kindness felt like. When his grandfather brought out a bucket of hot mash, Luke looked up in surprise. "I didn't think we had any oats left." His grandfather grunted. "We don't. I traded your pocket knife for it. Figure she needs it more than we need a blade right now." Luke tried not to cry, but the lump in his throat made it hard to speak. He simply nodded and took the bucket. Ash ate slowly, cautiously, but her eyes no longer looked quite so empty. That night, as the sun dipped below the distant hills, casting long shadows across the frost-bitten fields, Luke sat beside her again. He reached out and laid his palm on her cheek. "I don't know what they did to you," he whispered. "But you're not done yet. Not by a long shot." Ash closed her eyes, leaned into his touch, and for the first time, just the briefest flicker, her ears tilted forward. Hope. And though neither of them knew it yet, that small, stubborn spark would set in motion a story the whole town, and eventually the world, would never forget. Ash's recovery wasn't measured in days, but in inches. Each morning brought a new small battle. Coaxing her to stand, easing her into a few steps, tempting her to eat more than a few mouthfuls. Luke charted her progress in quiet victories. When she finally whinnied, low and rough, it startled both of them. It wasn't a sound of strength yet, but it was the first true note of life she'd shared, and Luke smiled like he'd heard a symphony. His grandfather, ever silent and stoic, kept his distance for the first week, offering only the occasional helping hand, a bale of hay here, a patch for the stall door there. But Luke noticed the way he lingered longer each day, watching from the shadows of the barn, his face unreadable. The old man hadn't said much about Luke's decision to buy the mare, but something shifted when he saw the boy brush her mane with care that could only come from somewhere deep. Maybe it reminded him of the past, or maybe he saw something in Luke that the boy couldn't see in himself just yet. "Horse is still broken," the old man muttered one morning, standing at the stall door. "I know," Luke answered, not looking up from where he knelt, cleaning a wound on Ash's leg. "But she's trying." The old man didn't reply, but he didn't walk away either. Winter rolled in fast, coating the ground in a layer of frost that crunched underfoot. The days grew shorter, and the barn became their shared refuge. Luke brought an old space heater from the shed, carefully watched its wires, and warmed up Ash's feed with molasses and oats, though they had little left to spare. At school, Luke kept to himself. Most kids didn't talk to the quiet boy in second-hand clothes, the one who stared out the window as if the real world was waiting beyond the trees. When they did talk, it was to tease him, about the dollar horse, about the smell of hay on his coat, about the way he never went anywhere after the bell rang. But Luke didn't care. Ash was waiting at home. Each evening, he'd drop his backpack by the door, ignore the ache in his knees or the numb in his fingers, and hurry to the barn. Ash would be there, lifting her head now when she heard his boots crunch the gravel, that dull flicker in her eyes brightening a little more each time. One afternoon, as the sun was dipping low and bleeding gold across the frostbitten pasture, Luke decided it was time. He opened the barn door and stood beside her, rope in hand. "Let's go for a walk." Ash hesitated. She stepped forward, then back again. Her breath misted the cold air. Luke waited, no pressure in his hands, just a calm presence at her side. Finally, she stepped out into the dying light. Her hooves crunched the ice, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring. They made it only 10 steps beyond the fence before she froze. Luke stayed beside her, not forcing her to move. "It's okay," he whispered. "One step at a time." The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Ash tensed but didn't bolt. Instead, she took another step. Then another. The walk became a ritual. Day by day, they went farther, across the field, down the dirt lane, past the line of old birch trees that marked the edge of the farm. Luke spoke to her the whole time, telling her stories about school, about his mom, about how the world felt heavier without her. Ash listened in that silent, steady way that only horses can, like she heard more than words, like she understood the space between them. But not everyone shared Luke's belief in the mare's potential. Word about the dollar horse spread through the small town like wildfire. At the gas station, at the feed store, even at school, people chuckled behind Luke's back or asked cruel questions to his face. "You planning to teach that skeleton tricks? Is she even gonna make it through winter? She's a lost cause, kid." Luke stopped answering. He didn't need to. Ash was answering for him. Every day she stood a little straighter, her wounds closing, her coat growing glossier beneath months of grime. But then came the storm. It hit without warning, a sharp gust rolling over the hills, followed by blinding snow and biting cold that seemed to seep into the bones of the earth. The power went out. Roads closed. School was cancelled for the week. Luke spent every waking hour in the barn. He wrapped Ash in extra blankets, hauled warm water from the stove, fed her by hand. She shivered but stood, leaning into him for warmth. On the third night, Luke didn't go back to the house at all. He lay curled in the straw, the sound of Ash's breathing steady and close. When he woke, he found his grandfather sitting in the stall doorway, thermos in hand, watching the pair of them like they were something sacred. "She's got a spine now," the old man said. Luke sat up slowly, blinking the sleep from his eyes. "She never lost it. Just forgot how to use it." His grandfather gave a low chuckle, then set the thermos down. "You remind me of your mother." Luke's breath caught in his throat. "She used to bring home birds with broken wings. Once brought in a fox with a shattered leg. Swore she could fix anything if you gave it enough love." He looked down at the thermos. "I didn't believe her then." Luke didn't speak. He couldn't. The old man stood, his knees cracking. "I do now." The days after the storm were different. Something had shifted. Luke's grandfather helped more. Teaching Luke how to check hooves, showing him how to wrap a poultice, even building a makeshift paddock so Ash could walk freely when the weather improved. One morning, while Luke was brushing her coat, he paused and looked at her profile. "You're not just surviving anymore, Ash. You're healing." Her coat was a rich bay now, the scars beneath softened but still there, reminders of where she'd come from. She no longer flinched when touched. Her eyes held the kind of wisdom only those who'd seen the edge could carry. But one problem still remained. Ash wasn't letting anyone but Luke near her. Not even his grandfather could approach without her pulling away. When the vet stopped by to give her vaccinations, it took nearly an hour just to calm her enough to enter the stall. "She's bonded hard," the vet had said, concern in her voice. "It's beautiful, but dangerous. If something ever happened to you—" Luke nodded, understanding but unsure what to do. He started bringing a chair into the barn and just sitting quietly, hoping Ash would grow used to others around. His grandfather joined him sometimes. Other times, it was his neighbor's daughter, a quiet girl named Sarah who had a soft voice and no judgment in her eyes. Ash was wary at first, but over time she let Sarah brush her, touch her neck, lead her across the paddock. It was progress, slow but promising. One evening, Sarah stayed behind after Luke went to the house. She sat beside Ash and whispered stories of her own, about losing her dad, about feeling like the world had left her behind. Ash listened. When Luke returned, he found the two of them together in silence, heads bowed close, breath mingling in the winter air. In that moment, he understood, Ash wasn't just healing herself. She was becoming something more. A quiet beacon for the broken. He realized then what the town hadn't understood, what even he hadn't fully seen. She was a mirror. People looked at her and saw what they feared in themselves: weakness, suffering, failure. But Luke saw what she was becoming. And slowly, others were beginning to see it too. That night, Luke stood in the paddock and watched Ash canter in slow gracca. The first signs of spring stirred beneath the frost like secrets waiting to surface. Melted snow ran in rivulets across the pasture, and crocuses pushed shyly through thawing soil. With the season's change came a new kind of urgency. Ash had grown stronger, more spirited, more alive. Her once hollow body had filled out, muscles rippling beneath her glossy coat, the shadows in her eyes replaced by a deep, lucid fire. But now the question loomed: what next? Luke stood at the paddock gate, arms crossed against the chill morning air, watching her prance with an ease that hadn't existed months ago. Her tail lifted with pride, hooves dancing over the earth like she owned it. And maybe she did. After all, Ash had not only survived, she had claimed her space in a world that once tried to discard her. His grandfather joined him, hands deep in his jacket pockets, gaze fixed on the mare. "She's not the same animal you brought home," he said, a note of reluctant admiration in his voice. "No," Luke replied, smiling faintly. "She's better." But with progress came pressure. Whispers around town had shifted in tone, from scornful disbelief to cautious curiosity. People who once laughed now nodded respectfully when they passed Luke at the general store. Someone even left a bag of feed at the barn door one night with no note, just a quiet acknowledgement. That attention, however, brought more than support. One Saturday afternoon, Luke found a letter folded under the barn latch. It was from the auction house, a reminder that horses sold at auction were logged in a central registry, and Ash's former owner had made an inquiry. Apparently, word had spread farther than Luke thought. Someone wanted to know what had become of the unrideable scrap horse. He stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it neatly and slipped it into his coat pocket. The next day, the man showed up. He arrived in a black truck with a trailer attached, the kind with worn tires and a rusted hitch. He stepped out slowly, chewing a toothpick and adjusting a battered cowboy hat. He was tall, hard-featured, and wore the kind of confidence that came from years of getting his way. "You the boy that bought the reject for $1?" he asked, voice slick with sarcasm. Luke didn't answer immediately. He stood between the man and the barn, body tense, jaw set. "She's not for sale," Luke said finally, low but clear. "I didn't come to buy," the man said, stepping forward. "Came to see for myself. Couldn't believe it when I heard. That mare wasn't worth a bucket of nails. Figured she'd be dead before New Year's." "She isn't." "No, she isn't." The man's eyes narrowed. "Which means I might have been wrong." Luke bristled, every muscle in his body tight. Ash had emerged from the barn at the sound of voices and now stood just inside the paddock, ears perked, eyes locked on the stranger. She didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Her stillness was a challenge in itself. The man watched her, then scoffed. You put all this effort into a throwaway. What for? Luke stepped aside, allowing the full sight of Ash to meet the man's gaze. Because she wasn't a throwaway. You just didn't see her. The man's jaw twitched. He looked back at Luke and, for a moment, seemed ready to argue. But then he shrugged and turned to leave. You're gonna learn the hard way, kid. Some things ain't meant to be fixed. I think you already learned that lesson, Luke said quietly, just before the truck door slammed. The trailer pulled away in a cloud of dust. Ash stayed still until the noise faded, then slowly approached the fence where Luke stood. He ran a hand down her neck, feeling the heat of her skin, the slow, steady beat of her pulse. They can't take you back, he whispered. Not now. Not ever. But the visit changed something. Luke began to feel the limits of the paddock pressing in, the edges of their world closing too tightly around them. Ash needed more space, more challenge, more purpose. She had come too far to live the rest of her life confined to a pasture behind a barn. One morning, he brought out an old saddle, weathered but sound. It had belonged to his mother, tucked away in a corner of the tack room where dust had nearly erased its memory. Luke brushed it clean, conditioned the leather, and set it on the paddock rail where Ash could smell it, see it, grow used to its presence. He didn't rush her. Everything they'd done had been on her time. This would be no different. Over weeks, he introduced the saddle inch by inch, first on her back without tightening, then secured gently, finally with added weight. At first, she shifted nervously, stepping side to side, but never panicked. Luke's voice anchored her. His presence grounded her. When he finally climbed into the saddle, it wasn't a triumphant act, it was reverent. He sat quietly, breathing deep, letting Ash feel him, balance him. He didn't ask her to move. That would come later. She stood still, proud and tall, bearing the weight without fear. His grandfather watched from the porch, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, but Luke knew he was watching. The next day, a new saddle pad appeared in the tack room, navy blue and lined with fleece. No explanation. No words. Just another silent offering. And then came the town fair. Every spring, the fairgrounds hosted a modest horse show, trail events, barrel racing, a few jumping classes. Mostly locals. Nothing high stakes. But for Luke, it represented something more. A chance to show people who Ash had become. A chance to prove what belief and time and love could do. Sarah helped him register. She insisted on entering Ash in the open trail class, a test of calm under pressure, obstacles that mirrored trust and communication more than brute force. You've done harder things with her in that paddock, she said. You're ready. Luke wasn't sure if she meant him or the horse. The morning of the fair was cloudless. The air buzzed with anticipation and laughter, the scent of popcorn and fresh hay thick in the breeze. Luke led Ash from the trailer slowly, giving her time to adjust. She looked around, ears flicking, muscles taut, but she didn't bolt. She stayed with him. They entered the ring with dozens watching from the fence. Some were locals who remembered the dollar horse story. Others didn't know it all, and Luke preferred it that way. Let her tell them herself. The course was simple. A bridge to cross, cones to weave through, a rope gate to open and close. Ash approached each challenge with poise. She hesitated at the bridge, hooves tapping uncertainly at the wooden slats. Luke leaned forward, whispered something only she could hear. She stepped on, crossed it, calm. When the gate closed behind them and the final bell rang, a hush lingered. Then applause. Small, hesitant at first. Then stronger. Ash didn't need a ribbon. Luke didn't either. What they had won wasn't measured in points. Afterward, a woman approached them. She introduced herself as a trainer from a nearby equine therapy center. She'd been watching, she said, and was moved by what she'd seen. That horse has something rare, she said. Patience. Empathy. Have you ever thought about therapy work? Luke looked at Ash standing still beside him, calm in the face of noise, of people, of the world that had once crushed her. He hadn't thought of it before, but now he couldn't stop thinking about it. He looked back at the woman. "Tell me more." By the time they returned home that evening, the sun had dipped low again. Ash was tired but not weary. Luke looked. The barn was quiet that evening, bathed in a soft orange hue as the sun dipped below the treeline. Luke stood in the aisle, brush in hand, rhythmically moving it across Ash's flank. She leaned into his touch, her breath slow and even, her trust absolute. He often found himself losing track of time during these moments, not because there was nothing else to do, but because everything important seemed to happen right here. Every stroke of the brush felt like a conversation between them, a silent exchange of loyalty and love. It had been 2 months since the fair. Word had spread quickly after their calm, confident performance. Not because they won anything, Ash didn't even place in the top 5, but because of how she carried herself. A few people had taken videos. Some called her the miracle mare. Others said she was proof that compassion could rewrite fate. Luke hadn't cared for the labels, but he did notice how strangers began showing up at the fence line, quiet observers hoping to catch a glimpse of the mare who had once been sold for $1. The therapy center reached out again, this time with a formal offer. They wanted Ash to come in once a week to work with children, many of them nonverbal, many from broken homes. The center believed Ash's calm presence, her gentle energy, could reach them in ways humans often couldn't. Luke had hesitated at first, protective, unsure if she was ready for something so big. But Ash had already shown him what she was capable of. She had chosen to live. Now, maybe it was time to let her choose to give. The first visit was quiet, almost too quiet. The center was tucked behind a grove of pine trees on the outskirts of town, far enough away to feel like its own world. Ash stepped out of the trailer with grace, head high, ears twitching. Luke walked her slowly across the gravel lot, through the wooden gate, and into a wide pasture lined with ramps, benches, and a few scattered hay bales. Children watched from a distance, their eyes wide with curiosity and uncertainty. A small boy sat alone near the fence, bundled in a navy jacket that dwarfed his frame. His face was partially hidden by a wool hat pulled low, his hands buried in his sleeves. A therapist knelt beside him, murmuring softly, trying to coax him to speak. He hadn't said a word in over a year. Ash saw him. Without a cue, without a lead, she walked to the boy. Luke tensed, ready to intervene, but the therapist held up a hand, eyes wide. Ash lowered her head slowly, pausing just inches from the boy's lap. She didn't nudge. She didn't demand. She waited. The boy looked up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a small, tentative hand, he reached out and touched her muzzle. It was barely a graze, but it broke something open. The boy exhaled deep and shaky, like he had been holding his breath for months. The therapist whispered something to another staff member who immediately began to cry. Later, Luke was told that was the first time the boy had touched anything willingly since his parents had died in a car accident. Ash had done what no one else could. From that moment, something shifted. Ash became a fixture at the center. Once a week turned into twice, then 3 times. Her presence seemed to pull light out of dark places. Children whispered to her, clung to her mane, painted pictures of her with shaky crayons. One girl with autism who struggled with physical contact found peace brushing Ash's coat for hours, tears running down her cheeks without knowing why. Ash stood still for every child, breathing with them, never startled, never impatient. Luke watched from a distance, always near, but letting Ash guide her own journey. He realized something unexpected. He wasn't just proud of what she had become. He was learning from her. How to be still. How to listen. How to let people come to you when they're ready. How healing isn't always loud or fast. Sometimes it's quiet, like the steady thud of hooves on soil or the warmth of a breath against cold skin. But with attention came pressure again. A national equine publication reached out. They wanted to feature Ash's story. From $1 to a hero, the headline would read. Luke declined at first. He didn't want to commercialize her pain. But the editor was persistent and promised a donation to the therapy center. After long thought, he agreed, on one condition: the article had to focus on the children. Ash wasn't the hero, he said. She was the bridge. The article went viral. Donations poured in. The therapy center expanded its pasture, added ramps for wheelchair accessibility, and hired 2 new full-time staff members. But amidst all the noise, Luke kept his life simple. Mornings with Ash, afternoons at the farm, evenings with his grandfather, who, to everyone's surprise, had started bringing apples for Ash himself. One night, after a long day at the center, Luke leaned against the paddock fence, watching the stars blink to life. Ash stood beside him, calm and steady. "Do you ever think about where you came from?" he asked quietly. "Or is all that gone now?" Ash didn't respond, of course. But she turned her head, brushing her cheek against his arm, and for Luke, that was enough. The past didn't define her. It shaped her. But it wasn't her story anymore. The next morning brought snow, a late surprise. The fields sparkled like sugar, untouched and bright. Luke opened the barn doors to find Ash already awake, ears perked, coat steaming slightly from the warmth inside. She looked regal against the white, like something out of an old legend. A letter arrived that afternoon. It was from a young woman in Texas. She'd read the article and recognized the horse in the photos. Her father, she wrote, had once owned a mare that looked exactly like Ash. She was gentle, smart, and affectionate, but after he died, the mare had been sold off in a string of auctions. The girl never knew what became of her. The timing matched. The markings were identical. Luke wrote back, attaching photos. The woman responded with tears and gratitude. She didn't want Ash returned. She simply wanted to know she was okay. She found the right person, she wrote. Thank you for giving her the life I couldn't. Luke printed the letter and pinned it in the barn, above Ash's stall. A reminder, not of pain, but of connection. Of the way fate ties people and animals together through moments we don't always understand. That spring, the center hosted an open day for families, donors, and community members. Ash was the centerpiece. Children ran beside her, adults watched in awe, and Luke stood back, letting the story tell itself. When a reporter asked what made Ash so special, Luke answered simply. She gave her trust when she had every reason not to. That kind of courage changes people. The event ended with a sunset ceremony. A child who had once screamed at the sight of horses now rode Ash, led gently by a therapist. The crowd applauded. Luke felt a warmth in his chest so deep it almost hurt. As they loaded up that evening, a boy approached Luke. He was shy, maybe 9, with a crooked smile and paint on his jeans. He looked up at Ash then,